Our guest today on Personally Speaking was a professional soccer player, and he's now chosen another walk of life. He's been called to the priesthood. Father Chase Hilgenbrinck is our guest on Personally Speaking. Please stay with us. Hello and welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm your host, Monsignor Jim Lisante, and Father Chase Hilgenbrinck joins me now. Father Chase is a priest of the Peoria Diocese in Illinois, where he is serving in his fifth year as Vocation Director. Before working in vocations, Father Chase was a campus chaplain at St. John's Catholic Newman Center at the University of Illinois. Father Chase was raised in a family that loved both the Catholic Church and sports. He became a high school All-American in soccer and played on the United States national team before moving on to play Division I soccer at Clemson University. After graduating from Clemson, Father Chase spent 4 years playing professional soccer in Chile, prior to returning to the United States and signing with Major League Soccer's New England Revolution. In 2008, Father Chase resigned his contract and entered Mount St. Mary's Seminary. He was ordained a priest of Jesus Christ in 2014. Father Chase is here with us today to talk about his vocation journey and the Catholic faith and values that matter the most to him. Joining me now, I'm so pleased to welcome to Personally Speaking, Father Chase Hilgenbrinck. All right, we are delighted to welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm going to get this right. Father Chase is easy, but Father Chase Hilgenbrinck, did I say that right?
Right on. Good
Right on.
German accent
Excellent.
there, huh?
Now, let me ask you, you've said before in other interviews that you come from a family of faith. So I want to know, when you look back at the way your parents raised you, what did they do right in raising you?
My parents were an authentic witness of the Catholic faith. That's the best way I can say it. I say this to no offense to them, but only because I know the difference today. I describe my family growing up and my parents as faithful but not on fire. And
Okay.
again, I don't say that in to their detriment in any way. I
Yeah.
say that because they're living out a different faith than they were when I was growing up, and I see that difference. In fact, I mean that to be a compliment to them. They've continually grown. But my parents grew up in rural Western Illinois, farm families, and just came from good German roots, that were good Catholics that just knew what to do and knew what was right, were honest people, and they knew that they wanted to live a life of faith, and so they were certainly mass goers. They went to confession, whenever they knew that they needed to. But even my parents will tell me today, like they didn't know how to grow. They didn't know how to grow, and it wasn't until we moved to Central Illinois to the Peoria Diocese, and it was maybe in the mid '90s or so that an evangelical group, kind of got them going into a Bible study because the Catholic Church didn't have any.
Right.
I remember them telling me that, they wanted to give us the sex talk growing up, my brother and I, and that was a turning point because they went to their parish priest and they said, "What resources do you have? We hear people saying we should do this. We don't really know how to give this talk to our kids." And he pointed them to something like Focus on the Family or something. It was like the only thing. It was a Protestant group who had something that this priest knew about. And so they really tapped into the resources they had, and they start to realize, hey, there's more out there, and I think, Dr. Scott Hahn started getting on a cassette tape, and you started, all of a sudden things started to unfold, and ever since then they've been hungry disciples. They've grown a lot, and certainly because of my vocational calling, we've grown a lot together.
Father Chase is our guest. And Chase, I want to ask you, sometimes when you come from a Catholic family, whether they're really on fire, as you say, or not, there are people who suspect that the vocation you have is their vocation, not your own. Did you ever feel in any way that they were for or against you responding to God's call?
I Here's the thing. I trusted my parents.
Hmm.
I've always trusted them. That is as we know, that's the foundation of any relationship in life, whether that's with a family member, a friend, a romantic relationship, or it's with God, right? There is no growth in relationship without trust. And so I've always trusted my parents. I've always trusted them. And so I knew, even when I didn't tell them about my vocational discernment, and I told no one, I didn't tell them that I was discerning priesthood. I was too afraid to talk to anybody about it. I didn't really talk about my faith necessarily with anybody. Again, I just did what I was supposed to do. I went to mass and we don't talk about it. But there came a time where I realized when I was going to go to seminary, and I'd made that decision, on my own, in my own prayer and through discernment with others. But when I finally went to tell my parents, I thought, I have no idea how they're going to respond to this, but I know that they will support me if they believe that I'm responding to God's will, because they want me to do God's will, and I trust that. I trust that they always wanted me to do God's will. I didn't know what they thought about me going to be a seminarian or to become a priest. So it was certainly something that they had a lot of questions about in the very beginning, as anyone would. Like, where did this come from? It seems like, it was something that came out of nowhere, or it was an overnight decision. They didn't realize that I had been discerning for 2 to 3 years at that time. And ever since that first week of them becoming aware of my discernment, they've supported me ever since.
I was sharing with people, my mom's funeral was last year, and I told them about going off on an Ignatian retreat to discern whether or not I was called to priesthood, and finding recently a letter from her saying, priesthood is a noble and wonderful calling, and if you're truly called, then we support you, but it's got to be your vocation, and you're saying it is in fact your vocation. Well, let's talk about vocations and the work you do. In my diocese, I had a chance to be director of family life, pro-life, and do media stuff, but I have to say, the one job I never wanted, Father Chase, was to be vocation director, because it just seems so hard, so indefinite. I'm pro-life director. I go out and give talks about the sanctity of life, help women who are in crisis pregnancy. But how in the world do you find candidates who are in fact good, healthy, spiritually sound people who might make great priests one day? What's the way to do the job of being vocation director, in your case for the Diocese of Peoria?
That's a great question, because as we say as vocation directors, there's no playbook.
Yeah.
No one's, you become a pastor and you inherit, kind of a history with that parish. And usually that begins with the secretary who knows all things. But certainly there's a parish family there that's been living there long before you have, and they'll probably live long after you leave. In vocations, it's all about relationships. That's the start of it. We have to build relationships. So we have to be self-starters. We have to be those who are going out, who are unafraid to build relationships with the youth. I think of our ministry as a two-pronged ministry. One is that we have to build a culture, right? Because culture is everything. So we have to build a vocations culture within our diocese, and that includes getting all of the priests of the diocese involved. I tell all the priests in my diocese that they are vocation directors of their own parish. They have to be, because I don't know their youth. I don't know the young men in their parish if they don't introduce me to them. Right. And so they're the vocation director of their own parish. I jokingly call myself the vocation collector, because I'm just collecting vocations from your parishes and handing them to the bishop. Right. That's all I have to do. But the other side of that is not only building a culture of vocations, but certainly having a missionary mindset of, I'm going to evangelize the youth. I'm going to pick the fruit of discipleship in my diocese. And so when I look around, I look around. What are the parishes that seem to be booming? What are the Newman centers, the high schools that are making disciples on a daily basis and are producing fruit? Because vocations, at least the secondary vocation, right? Our first vocation is to holiness.
Right.
Our secondary vocation is to priesthood, to consecrated life, to holy matrimony. And so I'm going to find out where people are living out holiness, the first vocation, because that's the only foundation to the secondary vocation, right? And so where those places are booming, I'm building relationships, and I'm certainly inviting young men into discernment at those places. I don't know who the Lord is calling. That's the secret of vocation. I can't tell. I have no idea who the Lord is calling. I can't read hearts. He hasn't given me that ability quite yet, right? But I can see the type of men that the Lord could be calling, and the type of men I desire to see as priests in our church, which are men who are mature, who are virtuous, who are living out holiness, who desire, our church to be strong and masculine and loving and evangelistic, and all those things that we're desiring in the church today. and we're looking for in a priestly fatherhood. Those are the things that I'm looking for in young men.
Well, the Chase Hilgenbrinck. So I guess I want to mention to you when you just use that word, a masculine vocation. We had Senator Josh Hawley on not too long ago, and he's written a book called Manhood. So that we're not talking just about a faux machismo. What do you mean by saying we're looking for priests who have a certain masculinity?
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking that. And we could have, as you mentioned, we could have various definitions of what masculinity might look like. My basic definition, and it's based on my own life, my basic definition of masculinity is a man who has freedom to respond when the Lord is calling. Right? Does a man have freedom to become the man that God is asking him to be? I remember people thinking that I was such a great man because I was a professional athlete. Wow, that's you talk about machismo
Yeah.
and the world that we lived in, and people saying, man, he must be a real man, right? Because right, our concept of masculinity in our culture is money, athleticism, the important people we surround ourselves, including beautiful women, whatever it might be. Like that's what
Yep.
masculinity is. And no, that's the world's definition of masculinity. The church's definition and God's definition of masculinity is one who is free to respond to his voice, to become the man that he is calling us to be. And so honestly, one of the things that I see in an authentic masculinity in our culture today are men who live in freedom. Men who are living in that authentic freedom, responding to God's voice, who are unafraid to be holy, unafraid to be mature and virtuous, and to live out virtue. And you see that often in the way that they treat other women that are around them, right? You see it in the way that they have authentic friendships with their peers, right? Which is it's just a dying kind of ability that we have in this technological age. You see it in the way that they speak and look each other in the eyes. You see it in the ways that they're able to engage in relationships, right? And so important, but yeah, there's certainly definitions of
Like that.
masculinity that are
Like
helpful and
that
unhelpful.
definition as you offered. And you mentioned before growing up in farm country and that name Hilgenbrinck being German. Are you all German or is there a blend?
No, it's a blend of German Irish. Yeah, my
Oh, that's
mom is
great.
a MacDonald.
Okay, yeah, and I'm a McNeil on my mother's side. I
Okay.
wanted to ask you too. I grew up and got ordained from at the exact moment actually when Pope John Paul, Saint John Paul was being selected to lead the church. You've been ordained under and influenced by the Holy Father of Francis's pontificate. I just wonder, especially with his passing recently, I know I've been asked by just about everybody, what do you think of his legacy? What did he do for you as a priest trying to serve people? What did Francis mean for you?
Yeah, so Francis was. I remember being a deacon in the seminary when we saw the white smoke in 2013, and there was an excitement, right? There was an excitement about who this man would be, and having someone that's not from Europe, and what would that look like for a church, and of course he came on the scene, and it was exciting, to see. A man who immediately had new ideas about humility. We saw him go pay his hotel bill that day, and everybody made a big deal because he jumped on the bus with the rest of the Cardinals. Well, he was in the College of Cardinals, like I mean that you talk about good masculinity. It's being one of the guys. He was just one of the brothers. He saw himself for who he was, and he didn't know the identity of a pope, right? He was in his mind. I can only imagine that day he was still a cardinal, right? And or whatever. But certainly I was inspired by Francis in his in Evangelii Gaudium, when he first came out, and we were talking about evangelization as a church, and how he was going to be the Pope to kind of live out some of the foundations that John Paul II and Benedict XVI had laid out in their intellectual, minds that were so beautiful, and kind of teaching the church, and Francis was going to play some of that out. So it was good to see his pastoral heart. It was good to see his freedom to live out some of those things. Of course, there's just like any leader, there's times we desired more clarity, or
Mhm.
we desired a leader that would teach more, right? We got away from, the teaching popes, and we said, oh, we want them back, and so certainly it's interesting, to look back on a man's legacy and say anything, right now that's definitive. It's so fresh, but I certainly respected Pope Francis, and I find myself even now. I preached last night at Bradley University here in Peoria, and I just, begging them to pray for our next Holy Father, whoever that may be, and realizing that no matter who our next Peter will be, realizing that he's going to be human,
Yeah.
and just recognizing the beauty is that we need a Peter, right? He's the sign of unity and authenticity of the Catholic Church.
Father Chase Hilgenbrinck is our guest, and I want to mention that back at that election of Pope Francis, I was working at Fox News, and we were all prepared for anybody but him. And so we were all, who, the other Argentine cardinal was the one because he was younger, we thought would be the one, and he wasn't. I got to ask you too, though, because for me, I love the whole approach to remembering where he came from a family of migrants, being open to the marginal and welcoming everybody into the family of the church, taking seriously Christ's admonition that he who welcomes the stranger welcomes me. But in a place like mainstream Peoria, was his outreach to migrants something that resonated, or am I misreading Peoria? I remember Richard Nixon years ago when he's president saying, as Peoria goes, so goes the whole country.
Isn't that interesting?
And tell us about
Yeah.
Peoria, the place where you serve as a priest.
Yeah, Peoria is a great culture. We're right here on the Illinois River in Peoria. We got the Mississippi River running through the western part of our diocese as well, and so we're right in the heart of America. And certainly it's mostly a rural diocese with several big industries that are in the midst of our diocese in the big cities. Of course, we got the University of Illinois in Champaign. If you continue on 74, you come this way in Peoria, it's the corporate offices of Caterpillar, which just in the process of moving, but all of their things are here, and you get to Bloomington, which is my home, as the corporate offices of State Farm, and then you get up to the Quad Cities on the Mississippi River on the western part, and that's the corporate offices of John Deere. So
Oh,
we have large corporations right here in the midst of our diocese that a lot of our people are obviously a part of, and it brings people to Illinois when really here in Illinois people have been leaving in droves. But it's a beautiful diocese. We're a place that are vocation rich. We do have a great culture of vocations that I stepped into and continue to try to develop. We have a great presbyterate. I think we're known for our presbyterate here in the Diocese of Peoria. A lot of people, don't want to leave. People who want to leave Illinois don't want to leave the Diocese of Peoria, and we're proud to say that that's one thing that keeps them there, that keeps them here. But Peoria, certainly, we have a large group of Hispanics in many places because of the industry, and I'm thankful that I spent so much time in South America that I'm fluent in Spanish and get to be a part of those communities today as a priest.
you mentioned, Father Chase, the time you spent as a professional athlete in soccer. And I ask you this because and maybe it's a myth, but the sense of team sports is that your community of support, your back is covered by these people you play with and you work with. And that it's a wonderful thing. It creates a community spirit on that team, wherever you're
Yes.
serving or wherever you're playing. I mention that because secular priesthood, it can be, especially as we have in many places in the country, diminished number of vocations available. It can be an isolating or singular experience where you don't have what you had in team sports. How do you handle the difference that in your life, being part of a team that hopefully always had your back, and now kind of sometimes having to be an independent operator? Where does your support come from?
That's a great distinction to draw from, and I think we have to remember a few more distinctions when it comes to that because I grew up on teams, and so we kind of had this, right. There's this line of that you have, as you alluded to. There's built-in friendship,
Hmm.
and certainly that was the case, in the days in which the sport was innocent, and so certainly in high school and in college, you think you're gonna, be friends with these guys for the rest of your life, and certainly I'm still in touch with those guys, but we realized even especially when I played professional sports in soccer, in Chile, they say in Spanish, they say there's no friends in football, they don't exist, you have teammates, but you don't have friendship. It's actually a kind of a refreshing reminder that friendship is something something more. Friendship is something deeper. And so I've spent my life in sports, and I honestly, I'm not in touch, and I wouldn't call, a lot of my former teams or teammates, authentic friendships, right? It was the sport that kept us together, and we served a very important part of each other's lives while we were together. And there's certainly some friendships that I love in those days. But however, it allows me today to say, all right, now that I'm not on a team and there isn't built-in friendship per se, even though you can be part of a parish, you can be part of the priestly brotherhood, it makes me realize that what I need in my life is authentic friendship. And so now there's an effort to reach out, and as I know that we're probably not very healthy as priests if we don't have authentic friendship in our life.
Right.
And so there's an intentionality, of me spending time with my family that is not just built in anymore, right? I have to be authentic in my and intentional in my relationship with my brother and his children and his wife. And I have to be intentional about my time with my parents while I still have them, right? I have to be intentional about calling brother priests and spending a day off with them, or spending vacation, or just having a phone call a couple times a week with a brother priest who understands my situation, who knows my heart, and desires my best interest. So certainly, there's a greater intentionality today, but I think it's built on that foundation of having what we would call built-in friendship that maybe sometimes was friendship, and other times it was just convenience.
Father Chase Hilgenbrinck, get it right, Lisante is our guest. Here's an interesting question. I think it is, but so you're this guy who's smart, articulate, charismatic, and happily, Chase, you do not look like the back end of a truck. I mentioned that to you because inevitably someone watching a program like this on TV or listening to it on the radio, if they get a chance to see you, is going to say, how in the world can he live 40 or 50 years as a celibate? It's not possible. So explain to us, as you must explain to the candidates who think they might be called to priesthood, how in God's name are you supposed to live as a celibate? What does it even mean to live as a celibate? What does it mean for you personally?
Thank you. Yeah, celibacy is not dependent on how one looks, right? Right. Celibacy is what we can rely on first and foremost. Is that celibacy is a gift that comes from God Himself. It's the gift of the Holy Spirit. It's a gift to live in imitation of Jesus and His celibate life, right? And to be incorporated into Him. We are called to live out chastity, just like a married couple is meant to live out chastity in their marriage.
In pre-Cana, which I've been doing since I was practically ordained long ago, but one of the questions that comes up is why aren't young people who are coming to be married in the church also attending and going to mass? And they have a bunch of things they say. They'll say, well, I'm very busy, as if that's an excuse. There are 168 hours in every week, and you find the time for everything that matters, but you can't give the Lord at least 1 hour. But the other thing they say is, well, we go to church and the homily is not feeding us, or there are so many priests from other countries, they have accents. But the one that's come up most recently, and I wanted to ask you how you handle it, people are still damaged by, hurt by, betrayed by the scandals of the church. And while you and I can say that every study indicates that it's 4% of the priests who have done bad things and 96% who are trying to live holy lives and would never hurt a kid, nonetheless, one kid being hurt is damage enough.
Yeah.
First of all, how did you personally process what the scandal meant? What are we to learn from it? And then how do you encourage people, whether they become priests or not, just to not judge the entire church by this horrible, horrible sin that we've had to endure?
Yeah. Well, you ask a good question. How did I personally deal with that? That was probably one of the greatest obstacles for me to respond to the call. I began discernment in about 2005, right? And so that was 3 years after, all this stuff broke. And so in the midst of that, I'm saying, I want to be part of that brotherhood. And I didn't know any statistics. I didn't know any numbers. I just knew that there was a lot of jokes about Catholics and who would want to be part of that group, even as a Catholic church. And how, you get back to that, what we were talking about, trust. I was thinking, can I trust, right? How can I build a relationship with other brother priests if I can't trust them and know them? And certainly, I didn't want to be part of our whatever group, clan, club, team, whatever you want to call it, that is considered pedophiles or something like that. Like I want nothing. I want nothing to do with that. And so that was a real stumbling block for me when I was in discernment. And There was a time in my prayer when I was praying about that because I was authentically feeling called that it was from God. It wasn't from me. I wasn't sharing this with anybody else. There weren't people influencing me, but I just day after day after day, I was convinced that Jesus himself had invited me in to his priesthood. And one day I just said, Lord, why? Why I don't think I can do this. I don't want to be part of this group. And there were many reasons, not just that, but that was one of the things on my mind. And I don't want to say that I heard the Lord's voice, but there was a conviction in my heart that came from him that I do believe was his presence and his voice essentially saying, if not good men, how will we clean this up? How will we do this? How will we get over it? How, right? Why not you? And so there was a question like I was asking, why me? And the words that came back, why not you? And ever since then, I've desired, like in my priesthood, in seminary and in priesthood, I've desired to be a man that gives other people confidence that they can say, well, what about, and it's not about me. I'm not trying to call attention to myself, but I'm saying, right, every time that they say, well, look at that guy over there who did wrong. Look at that guy over there who embarrasses the church. And I want to say, yeah, and start naming the ones that you think inspire you. Start naming the ones that are faithful. Start naming the ones that are bringing you the Eucharist day in and day out and take care of your elderly mother and are there when your kids are sick and whatever, like, let's start turning the tide, right? And I believe in that type of church, and I want to be part of that type of church, and so I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, right? If that's the type of masculinity, that's the type of priesthood, that's the type of church that I want to live in. Well, I better start living it, And so I had to grow up, and that's part of my maturity and my vocational call.
Wow, perfect. I'm going to end on that note. You're ordained in 2014.
2014.
2014. I'm ordained in 1981, and I love the
Praise
church
God.
so much, and I love God so much. But I do worry, what's coming after when I hopefully go home to God. And when I listen to people like you, Father Chase, it just gives me such hope and confidence that our church is in the hands of wonderful, wonderful young men like yourself, and that this love of Christ that we share will continue to torch the world because of good people like you. So thank you for your priesthood. Thank you for everything you've shared with us today. And please pray for me as I pray for you.
Amen, brother. Thank you for having me today and allowing me this witness.
It's great. Thanks for being with us on Personally Speaking. If you need to reach me, you can do that at personallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. You probably listened to this program on Sirius XM, the Catholic channel 129, but you can also watch the program on YouTube by searching under Personally Speaking with Monsignor Jim Lisante. We're also on Facebook at Personally Speaking with Monsignor Jim Lisante and on Instagram at Personally Speaking Podcast. I'm privileged to serve as host and executive producer of Personally Speaking. Our producer is Lisa Jandovitz. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be with you again next time on Personally Speaking.